The morning sun touched the streets with a soft golden light as Martha walked slowly down the sidewalk. She carried her small handbag close to her chest, and in her other hand she held a folded check. Her steps were steady but a little slow, showing her age. Martha was a woman of 67 years, with kind eyes and a gentle smile that never seemed to leave her face. She believed in treating people with warmth, even strangers, because that was how she had raised her son. That day, the check she carried was not a large one, but to her, it was important. It was money she had received for helping a family in her neighborhood with some sewing work. Martha still did small tasks like this, not because her son couldn't support her, he was well settled, but because she liked to keep herself busy and independent. Earning something with her own effort gave her a sense of dignity. She wanted to buy some groceries, pay a little toward her monthly medicine, and maybe save the rest for her church donation. The bank stood a few blocks away, tall and shining with glass doors that reflected the bright sky. Martha looked at the building with a small smile. She had visited many times before, though not always this branch. Each time, she carried the same sense of patience, waiting her turn, standing in line, and greeting the teller with respect. For her, banks were not just places of money, they were places where trust lived. As she stepped inside, cool air touched her face, and she felt a little relief from the warmth outside. The bank was busy that morning. Several customers waited in line, some holding slips of paper, some talking quietly on their phones, while others tapped their feet impatiently. Martha, however, did not rush. She found her place at the end of the line and folded her hands gently in front of her. While she waited, she looked around. A young father held his daughter by the hand, guiding her carefully. An elderly man leaned on his cane, looking thoughtful. A woman in a business suit scrolled through her phone, hardly looking up. Martha noticed all of them with the same gentle curiosity she always carried. She often thought to herself, every person here has their own story, their own worries, their own needs. This thought always made her patient and kind, even when others were not. Minutes passed, and the line moved forward slowly. Martha took out her check again, just to make sure it was folded neatly. She looked at the handwriting on it and smiled faintly. The person who had given it to her had written her name carefully. She felt grateful for the small amount, because gratitude was something she practiced every day. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes, it was her turn. She stepped forward to the counter with a warm smile. Behind the counter sat a young teller named Linda. Her hair was tied neatly, and she wore a crisp uniform. But her face looked tired, and her eyes showed little interest in the customers. "Good morning," Martha said softly, placing the check on the counter. Her voice was calm, polite, and filled with warmth. Linda looked at the check without returning the greeting. She raised an eyebrow, then picked it up quickly. Her eyes scanned the paper, and she let out a short sigh. "What's this for?" she asked, her voice sharp. Martha blinked for a moment but kept her smile. "It's a check, dear. I would like to deposit it into my account." Linda tapped her nails on the counter. "Do you even have an account here?" she asked, glancing up briefly. "Yes, I do," Martha replied gently. She reached into her bag to take out her small passbook, the one she always carried as proof. She placed it on the counter next to the check. Linda looked at the book, then back at the check, and shook her head slightly. She seemed annoyed, as though helping Martha was a burden. Other customers shifted behind her, some whispering quietly, some just waiting impatiently. Martha felt the weight of Linda's tone, but she refused to let it touch her kindness. She stood straight, her hands folded, waiting calmly. The air in the bank was quiet except for the soft sounds of counting machines in the background. Martha thought of her son for a brief moment, how he always told her, "Mama, never let someone's attitude change your kindness. Hold on to your dignity." She carried those words in her heart like a small shield. Still, she felt a small ache in her chest as she waited. She hoped the teller would simply process the check so she could be on her way. She had planned to buy fresh bread from the bakery nearby and maybe some flowers for her table. Martha loved flowers, especially lilies. They reminded her of peace. She did not know that this visit to the bank would be unlike any other visit she had made before. She did not know that this small check, folded neatly in her bag, would soon open a story that would touch every person in that branch. She simply stood there, patient and kind, unaware that her simple act of trust was about to be tested in a way she never imagined. The check lay on the counter between Martha and Linda. To Martha, it was a symbol of her honest work, her quiet effort, and her independence. To Linda, however, it seemed like just another piece of paper in a long morning of transactions. Linda turned the check over in her hands with a frown, as if the handwriting on it had personally annoyed her. She pressed her lips together and looked back at Martha. "Where did you even get this?" she asked, her tone sharp and impatient. Martha blinked but answered politely. "It is payment for some sewing work I completed for a neighbor's family." Linda raised an eyebrow. "Sewing work? And they paid you with a check?" She let out a short laugh, though it carried no humor. Martha nodded gently. "Yes, dear. That is how they paid me." Other customers shifted in line. Some of them looked uncomfortable, while others looked curious. A man near the back muttered something under his breath about the line moving slowly. Linda sighed loudly, tapping the counter with her pen. "This looks suspicious," she said. "I don't think it's valid." Martha's heart skipped, but she kept her smile steady. "It is valid," she said softly. "Would you please check it carefully?" Linda leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. Her face showed doubt, as if she had already made up her mind. Martha stood there calmly, her hands clasped in front of her, refusing to let the younger woman's attitude shake her dignity. Inside her heart, however, Martha felt a small sting. She had lived long enough to recognize the tone of dismissal. She had met people before who looked at her and decided she was not important. But Martha had also learned not to return unkindness with unkindness. She chose patience, because patience gave her peace. "Do you even know how to read this check?" Linda asked suddenly. Martha looked down at the paper and then back up, her eyes soft but steady. "Yes, dear," she replied. "I may be older, but I understand how a check works." The teller's cheeks flushed slightly, but instead of softening, she turned colder. She held the check between her fingers, staring at it as if it were a problem she wished would disappear. Finally, she shook her head. "I don't trust this. I don't think this is real." Martha opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say a word, Linda did something that made the entire line gasp. She tore the check in half right down the middle without hesitation. The sound of ripping paper filled the air, sharp and final. Martha's eyes widened. Her breath caught in her throat. She did not shout, she did not protest. Instead, her lips trembled as she whispered softly, "Oh." The people in line behind her exchanged looks of shock. A woman whispered to her husband, "She shouldn't have done that." Another customer shook his head in disbelief. Martha stood frozen for a moment, staring at the torn pieces of the check lying on the counter. It wasn't just paper that had been destroyed. It was her effort, her trust, and her hope for a simple day of peace. Linda shrugged as if it were nothing. Next, she called out loudly, waving her hand to the customer behind Martha. But no one moved. The line had grown silent, and all eyes were on Martha. The older woman swallowed hard, gathering her strength. Slowly, she reached for her small handbag, picked it up, and held it close. She bent slightly and whispered, "Thank you for your time," her voice almost too soft to hear. Then, with steady but slow steps, Martha turned and walked away from the counter. She did not look back. She did not want to give the teller the satisfaction of seeing her tears. Outside the bank, the world continued as if nothing had happened. Cars passed by, people hurried to work, and the sun shone brightly in the sky. But for Martha, the light felt dim. She found a wooden bench near the sidewalk and sat down carefully. The torn image of the check stayed in her mind like a shadow. She lowered her head, and a single tear slid down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly, not wanting anyone to see. It wasn't only about the money. It was about the way she had been treated, dismissed, doubted, and disrespected. She thought of her son, who had always told her, "Mama, you deserve the same respect as anyone else. Never forget that." She whispered to herself, "I raised him to be kind, but the world can still be so unkind." Her hands trembled as she held her bag tighter. She wondered how she would explain to her son what had happened. She didn't want to trouble him, but she also felt the heavy weight of injustice pressing on her heart. Around her, people walked by, some glancing at her briefly before moving on. To them, she was just another woman sitting quietly on a bench. None of them knew the strength it took for her to keep her composure, to hold her dignity in the face of humiliation. Martha sat there for a long while, the sounds of the busy street surrounding her. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer, asking for courage and peace. What she did not know was that her story was not finished. Inside the bank, whispers continued among the customers. And later that very afternoon, someone would walk through those glass doors, someone whose presence would change everything. Inside the bank, silence still lingered after the sound of the check being torn. Some customers shook their heads, others whispered quietly, and a few looked down, unsure how to react. Everyone had seen what Linda had done, but no one stepped forward to speak. It was easier for people to stay quiet than to challenge what felt wrong. Linda returned to her papers as if nothing had happened. She typed on her computer and called out, "Next, please." Her voice was sharp, trying to move past the moment. Slowly, the line began to move again, though the customers' expressions showed disapproval. A woman leaned to the man beside her and whispered, "She didn't need to treat the lady that way." Yet, in the rush of a busy day, life in the branch returned to normal rhythms. The sound of printers, the clicking of keyboards, and the quiet murmur of conversations filled the air once more. For Linda, the check was gone, and so was the customer. In her mind, it was finished. But outside, Martha sat quietly on the bench, her heart heavy. She did not raise her voice, nor did she march back in to complain. Instead, she prayed silently for strength. She had lived through many hard moments in life, and this was just another trial. Still, her heart ached, not only for herself but for the world, because she believed respect should be free, yet sometimes it seemed so rare. While Martha sat lost in thought, events inside the bank began to take a turn she could not imagine. That very afternoon, the CEO of the bank, Daniel, planned a surprise visit to the branch. Daniel believed strongly in visiting branches without notice. He wanted to see how employees treated customers when they did not know the head of the bank was watching. Daniel arrived quietly, without any grand announcement. He stepped out of his car in a simple suit, holding only a small folder in his hand. His walk was calm and confident, but his heart was always gentle. He had grown up learning from his mother that true leadership was not about power but about kindness and fairness. As he walked into the branch, a few employees quickly stood straighter, realizing who he was. Whispers moved among the staff, "The CEO is here." But Daniel did not want attention. He gave a small smile and moved toward the counters, looking around at the customers. He liked to notice the details: how people were greeted, how problems were solved, how the staff carried themselves. It didn't take long before he sensed something unusual. He saw the way customers were still whispering among themselves, their eyes occasionally glancing toward Linda's counter. He noticed the atmosphere, a mix of discomfort and disapproval. Daniel approached one of the customers, a middle-aged woman who had been standing in line earlier during the incident. He spoke softly, "Good afternoon. I am Daniel, the head of this bank. May I ask if something happened here today?" The woman hesitated, surprised at his approach. But his kind tone gave her courage. She leaned closer and whispered, "Sir, a teller tore up an older woman's check this morning. It wasn't right. Everyone saw it." Daniel's eyes softened, but inside, his heart grew heavy. He thanked the woman for sharing, then quietly asked a few more customers. Their answers matched the same story. With steady steps, Daniel walked to Linda's counter. Linda looked up, startled to see him standing there. She quickly straightened her posture, her earlier confidence fading. "Good afternoon, sir," she said nervously. Daniel's voice was calm but firm. "I heard there was an issue with a customer's check this morning." Linda hesitated, her fingers tightening on her pen. "Oh, yes, sir. It was nothing serious. Just a suspicious check, so I destroyed it." Daniel tilted his head slightly, his eyes steady. "Did you confirm with any supervisor before making that decision?" Linda shook her head, her voice lower now. "No, sir. I didn't think it was necessary." Daniel paused, choosing his words carefully. A check is not just paper. To a customer, it represents trust, effort, and dignity. When we tear it without proper reason, we are not only destroying paper, we are destroying their trust in us. Linda swallowed hard, her face turning pale. She had never expected the CEO himself to question her actions. Daniel then asked quietly, "Do you still have the pieces of the check?" Linda opened her drawer reluctantly and pulled out the torn halves. Daniel picked them up carefully, holding them with a gentle respect that made the room fall silent again. He studied the handwriting for a moment, and then something inside him shifted. His eyes widened slightly, and his breath caught. He recognized the handwriting instantly. It was his mother's. Memories rushed into his mind: notes she had written in his school days, shopping lists she left on the kitchen table, and the letters she wrote to him during his college years. Daniel knew her handwriting as well as he knew his own. The torn check in his hands was hers. His heart tightened. The woman who had been disrespected was not just any customer. She was his mother, the very person who had taught him about dignity, patience, and kindness. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second, steadying himself. He did not want anger to guide him. Instead, he wanted fairness and truth. When he opened his eyes again, they carried a new strength. The story of the torn check was no longer just about a customer. It was about his mother. And Daniel knew this moment would change everything. Daniel held the torn check in his hand for a long moment. Around him, the bank seemed unusually silent. The sound of keyboards and printers felt distant, as if the entire room was waiting for what he would say next. His eyes stayed fixed on the handwriting, each curve of the letters pulling him into memories. He remembered his childhood desk, where his mother would leave little notes of encouragement, "Do your best today." He remembered the shopping lists she wrote carefully, even for the smallest things like bread and milk. And he remembered the letters she sent while he was at university, written late at night after her long day of work. That same handwriting now sat torn in his hand, broken in two pieces by someone who had not cared to look deeper. Daniel took a quiet breath. He looked up at Linda, who shifted nervously behind the counter. She tried to meet his gaze but looked away quickly, her confidence gone. "This check," Daniel said softly, "belongs to my mother." A ripple of shock moved through the branch. The customers who had stayed behind gasped quietly, and even the employees froze in their places. Linda's face drained of color. "Your mother," she stammered. Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes calm but filled with weight. "Yes. She came here this morning, and she placed her trust in this bank." Instead of receiving respect, her trust was torn apart literally. The silence deepened. The other tellers stopped working. Even the manager, who had just stepped out of his office, froze at the sight of the CEO speaking so firmly. Daniel placed the torn halves gently on the counter, as though they were fragile pieces of glass. "This is not just about my mother. It is about every person who walks through these doors. Every customer comes here with faith in us. That faith should never be dismissed." Linda's voice trembled. I didn't mean," but Daniel raised his hand slightly, not in anger but in quiet authority. "Respect is not about what we mean in our minds. It is about how we act. Words spoken carelessly can wound. Actions done without thought can break hearts." The truth of his words hung in the air. Customers nodded softly, some with tears in their eyes. They had all seen Martha's quiet dignity, her calm smile even when she had been mistreated. Daniel stepped back from the counter, holding the pieces of the check again. His voice grew gentler. "My mother taught me that true strength lies in kindness. She told me never to look down on anyone, no matter who they are or what they have. And yet today, here in this bank, she was looked down upon." Linda lowered her head, ashamed. Her hands shook as she held her pen, unable to look up again. The manager finally stepped forward, his voice careful. "Sir, I was not aware of what happened." Daniel looked at him calmly. "It is not about one person being aware. It is about the culture we build. If our staff feel they can dismiss or disrespect a customer, then something is wrong in the way we are guiding them." The manager bowed his head in silence. Daniel placed the torn pieces into his folder carefully. He straightened his shoulders, then turned toward the waiting customers. His voice carried through the room, calm yet firm. "To everyone here, I apologize for what you witnessed today. No one should have to face such treatment in a place that is meant to serve them. This bank belongs to the people. It does not matter how small or large the amount is. What matters is the dignity of every individual." A soft murmur of agreement filled the air. An elderly man near the back wiped his eyes. A young woman whispered, "That's true." Daniel paused for a moment. His thoughts turned to his mother, sitting somewhere outside, perhaps on a bench, holding her pain quietly. He felt a tear form in the corner of his eye but quickly blinked it away. He knew she would not want him to show anger. She had always taught him to lead with calm strength. He said gently, almost to himself, "She deserves better." Then, louder for all to hear, he added, "Everyone deserves better." The weight of his words stayed in the air, sinking into every heart present. Linda's hands dropped to her lap, her face pale with regret. The manager stood stiff, his mind racing with thoughts of what must be corrected. Daniel did not shout. He did not raise his voice. Yet his calm truth carried more power than any loud words could have. Finally, he closed his folder and gave a small nod to the staff. "I will speak with you all further. But for now, remember this: every act of kindness matters, and every act of disrespect is remembered." With that, he turned and walked slowly toward the glass doors. Each step was steady, his presence commanding silence until he left the building. Outside, Daniel scanned the sidewalk until he saw her. His mother sat on the wooden bench, her small handbag in her lap, her eyes lowered as if in prayer. Daniel's heart tightened. He walked toward her, the torn check safe in his folder, but the memory of her quiet tear weighing heavier than anything else in his life. The story of that morning was not over. The next words he would say to her would matter more than anything he had said in the bank. Daniel walked toward the bench with quiet steps, his heart heavy but his expression gentle. The afternoon sun spread a warm glow over the street, yet his mother looked small and tired as she sat with her handbag resting on her lap. Martha had her eyes lowered, her hands folded tightly as if she was holding her pain inside. When Daniel reached her, he paused for a moment. He did not want to startle her. Instead, he stood quietly, letting his shadow fall beside her. Slowly, Martha looked up, and when she saw her son standing there, her eyes softened. "Daniel," she whispered, a faint smile touching her lips. He sat down next to her, his suit crisp against the worn wood of the bench. "Mama," he said gently. "Why didn't you call me?" Martha shook her head with her familiar patience. "I didn't want to trouble you, my dear. You're busy with important work. This was a small matter." Daniel opened his folder and pulled out the two torn pieces of the check. He laid them carefully on his lap, the paper fragile and broken. "Mama," he said softly, "this is not a small matter. What happened inside is not just about money. It's about respect." Martha's eyes glistened, but she quickly looked away. "I didn't want to cause a scene. I thought it was better to stay quiet. My dignity is not in that paper. My dignity is in how I choose to act." Her words were calm, filled with wisdom, but Daniel felt a deep ache in his chest. He reached for her hand, holding it firmly in his. "You taught me dignity, Mama. You taught me patience. But you also taught me that no one should be looked down upon. Today, they looked down on you. And that hurts me more than anything." Martha squeezed his hand gently. "Son, I am proud of you. Not because you are the CEO, but because you are kind. Don't let anger guide you. Let fairness guide you." Her voice was soft, yet it carried the strength of years. Daniel listened, letting her words settle in his heart. He blinked back the tears that threatened to fall. "I promise you, Mama," he said quietly, "I will make sure this never happens again to you, or to anyone." For a moment, they sat together in silence, mother and son side by side on the old bench. The noise of the street faded, and all that mattered was the bond between them. Daniel finally stood, helping his mother to her feet. "Come," he said gently. Let me take you home." But before they left, Daniel walked back into the bank with Martha by his side. The moment they stepped through the glass doors, the atmosphere shifted. Employees straightened in their chairs, customers turned their heads, and whispers filled the air. Everyone could see the resemblance. The woman who had been dismissed earlier was indeed the mother of the CEO. Daniel guided her toward the center of the room. His voice was calm but firm as he spoke to the staff and customers. "This is my mother, Martha. This morning, she was treated with disrespect here. But let me be clear, she is not asking for special treatment because she is my mother. She deserves respect because she is a human being. And so does every single person who walks through these doors." The customers nodded, some smiling softly, others looking moved. A few clapped quietly, though Daniel raised his hand, signaling that applause was not necessary. He continued, "This bank is not built only on money. It is built on trust. If we lose that, we lose everything." Linda, still at her counter, lowered her head. Shame covered her face, and she could not meet Martha's gentle eyes. The manager stood behind Daniel, his expression serious, knowing that changes would have to be made. Martha, however, broke the silence. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the room. "I do not hold anger in my heart. I only wish that kindness becomes the way of this place." Her words touched everyone deeply. Customers nodded, and even some staff blinked back tears. There was something about Martha's calm dignity that carried more power than anger ever could. Daniel placed his hand on her shoulder. "You see," he said, looking at the staff. "Even after what happened, my mother chooses kindness. That is strength. That is the standard I expect in this bank." The room remained quiet, each person reflecting on the weight of his words. Daniel then led Martha out of the bank once more. As they stepped outside, he felt lighter, not because the problem was solved, but because he had spoken the truth. He knew his next steps as CEO would be harder. He would need to ensure real change, real training, and a new spirit of respect within the company. But for now, as he walked with his mother toward the car, he felt proud. Not of his position, not of his authority, but of the woman beside him. She had faced humiliation with grace, and she had reminded him that leadership without kindness was nothing. Daniel helped her into the car and closed the door gently. As he sat beside her, Martha placed her hand over his. "Son," she said, "today you showed the world who you truly are. And that is enough for me." Daniel smiled, his heart full. He knew the journey was not over, but he also knew that with his mother's wisdom guiding him, he would not fail. The day had begun with a torn check, but it was ending with something stronger, an unbroken bond between a mother's dignity and a son's promise. The bank felt strangely quiet after Daniel and his mother left. The sound of the glass doors closing still lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed what happened. Customers stood in silence, some with thoughtful expressions, others whispering to one another. The image of the gentle woman sitting calmly, speaking of kindness even after humiliation, stayed in everyone's hearts. Inside, Linda sat frozen at her desk. The counter in front of her, usually filled with papers and slips, looked heavy now with guilt. Her hands trembled as she picked up her pen, but she could not bring herself to write. She heard Daniel's words again, "Every act of disrespect is remembered." Her mind replayed the moment when she had torn the check. At that time, it had felt like a simple action, something done out of impatience. Now, she realized it had been far more than that. She had torn not just paper, but someone's trust. And that someone had turned out to be the mother of the very man who led the bank. The manager stepped forward, breaking the silence. His voice was low but clear. We all saw what happened today. And we all know this cannot happen again. The CEO's words were not only for Linda. They were for all of us. Other tellers nodded. A young employee whispered, he was right. Respect doesn't cost anything. Why is it so hard to give? Customers who had remained in the lobby also began to speak. One woman said softly, I came here just to deposit money, but today I've seen something I'll never forget. That Lady Martha showed more dignity in her silence than most of us show in our busy lives. An elderly man leaned on his cane and added, the CEO spoke with truth. A bank without respect is just a building. What makes it strong is the way people are treated inside. The words spread through the branch, weaving a quiet lesson into every corner. Even those who had not spoken could feel it, the weight of the incident, and the deeper meaning behind it. Linda finally stood, her face pale. She approached the manager slowly, her voice shaking. I was wrong, she admitted. I acted without care. I judged without thought. I don't know if I can undo what I did, but I know I will never forget it. The manager studied her for a moment. Owning your mistake is the first step. But remember, it is not about fear of punishment. It is about truly understanding why respect matters. Linda nodded, tears forming in her eyes. She realized that her mistake had not only hurt Martha, it had shown her something about herself. She had allowed impatience and pride to guide her actions, and now she carried the burden of that choice. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in his office later that evening, his mother resting quietly at home. He thought deeply about the day's events. His role as CEO was not only to grow numbers and open branches. His true responsibility was to ensure that every person who entered the bank felt valued. He opened his notebook and began writing down ideas. Training programs, he wrote. Not just about money, but about empathy. Workshops on dignity. Stories shared by customers. A culture built on kindness. He paused, then added, start with this branch. Let it be the example. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his mind full but his heart steady. He knew change would not come overnight. But he also knew that his mother's quiet strength had given him the direction he needed. Back at the branch, employees gathered together after closing time. For once, the room was not filled with hurried footsteps or the sound of machines. Instead, it was filled with honest conversation. One teller said, I realized something today. We look at people and see numbers, accounts, transactions. But behind each person is a story. Martha was not just an older woman with a check. She was a mother, a teacher of kindness, and the reason our CEO is who he is. Another added, it makes me wonder how many times have we dismissed someone quietly, even without tearing their paper? How many times have we failed to smile, failed to greet, failed to care? The staff fell into silence again, each reflecting on their own actions. For Linda, the lesson felt sharper than for anyone else. She sat alone at her counter, staring at the empty surface where the check had once rested. She whispered softly to herself, never again. As the night fell and the bank lights dimmed, the weight of the day remained. It was more than just a story of a torn check. It was a story of dignity, of a son standing for his mother, and of a workplace learning that respect must be the foundation of every action. The truth had been revealed, that kindness is not optional, and respect is not earned by status but given freely to every human being. The next day would bring new customers, new tasks, and new challenges. but the memory of Martha's quiet tear and Daniel's calm words would remain in the hearts of all who had been there. It was a memory that would not fade, a reminder that every act, whether large or small, carries meaning. And so, the bank stood not just as a place of numbers, but as a place where a lesson had been planted, one that would grow into a new way of seeing people, not as accounts, but as lives. The morning after the incident, the bank seemed different. Even before opening, the staff arrived quietly, carrying with them a sense of responsibility. They moved with more care, spoke with gentleness, and held themselves with awareness. The memory of Daniel's words from yesterday lingered in every corner. Every act of kindness matters, and every act of disrespect is remembered. Martha sat at home, sipping her tea, her small hands wrapped around the warm cup. She looked out the window, thinking about the events of the past day. Though she had felt pain, she also felt hope. Her son had shown her that integrity and respect were not just words, they were actions, and they mattered deeply in the world. A soft knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Daniel, carrying a small envelope and a gentle smile. "Good morning, Mama," he said, stepping inside. "I wanted to give you this." Martha took the envelope carefully. Inside was a new check, freshly written and carefully folded. She looked up at Daniel with tears in her eyes. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. Daniel shook his head, smiling softly. "I know. But it's not just about the money. It's about showing respect where it is due. You deserve it, Mama, and so does everyone who walks into that bank." Her eyes softened, and a quiet smile appeared. "You have grown into a man of true wisdom, Daniel. I am proud, not for your title, but for your heart." Meanwhile, inside the bank, the staff had gathered for a short meeting led by the manager. Linda, the teller who had torn the check, stood at the front, her hands trembling slightly. She had asked to speak first. "I want to apologize," she said quietly. "Not just to the customer, but to everyone here. I acted without thought. I let impatience guide me, and I forgot that behind every check is a person, a life, a story. I will never forget this lesson, and I will do my best to be better every day." Her words hung in the air. Other employees nodded slowly, some with tears in their eyes. A few whispered softly to each other, realizing that the day's events had changed more than one person, it had changed the culture of the branch itself. Daniel entered the room quietly, observing the scene. He did not need to say much. His presence alone reminded everyone that respect was not optional, and that actions mattered more than words. He finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "What happened yesterday was a moment of learning for all of us. We must never forget that kindness and dignity are the foundation of this bank. Our customers trust us with more than money, they trust us with their lives, their effort, their hopes. Treat them with care." Linda bowed her head. "Yes, sir. I understand." Daniel then looked at the other employees. "We will start a program to make sure every person who comes here is treated with respect. Stories, workshops, and reminders will be part of our daily routine. Change begins with awareness, but it continues with consistent action." The room felt lighter after his words. The lesson was not only heard but felt. Everyone realized that the day's events, painful as they were, could create lasting change. Later, Daniel took his mother on a quiet walk through the park near their home. The afternoon sun painted the sky with gold, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers. Martha held his hand, and Daniel felt the weight of gratitude and love in her touch. "Son," Martha said softly, "you have shown the world how to honor dignity. But remember, it is not just in big actions, it is in the small moments too. A smile, a kind word, a listening ear, these matter just as much as anything else. Daniel nodded, letting her wisdom sink in. I will carry this with me, Mama. In every decision I make, I will remember today. Martha smiled, her eyes shining. That is enough for me. That is enough for the world. In the following days, the bank's branch began to change visibly. Customers noticed the warmth in the greetings, the patience in the employees, and the genuine interest in every person's story. The culture of the branch became one where dignity was respected, and kindness was expected. Linda, now more mindful of her actions, made sure to greet every customer with a smile and speak with care. She never forgot the lesson of Martha's calm strength, and it guided her in every interaction. Even the customers who had witnessed the torn check returned, some just to thank the staff for the positive change they noticed. The incident that could have been only a story of humiliation became instead a story of learning, growth, and respect restored. And at the heart of it all was Martha. Quiet, wise, and gentle, she had shown that strength is not loud or forceful. It is calm, patient, and kind. Her dignity had inspired her son, reshaped a workplace, and touched the hearts of everyone who had been present. Daniel often thought back to that morning, holding the torn check, and remembered his mother's quiet prayer on the bench. It was that prayer, and her calm courage, that had guided him to ensure respect was not just a rule in the bank, but a principle that would live forever in its halls. And so, the story ended not with anger or punishment, but with dignity restored, respect earned, and a mother's quiet strength echoing through the lives of many. The torn check, once a symbol of disrespect, had become a symbol of change, kindness, and the lasting power of treating every person with honor. In the end, the bank was no longer just a building with money and accounts. It was a place where hearts were seen, stories were heard, and every person, no matter who they were, was treated with the respect they deserved. And Martha? She smiled, knowing that the lesson she had lived her whole life for had spread far beyond her own hands, reaching countless others through her son, and through the simple, enduring power of kindness.